Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tyler Reid and I'm the Manufacturing Application Manager here at GoEngineer. And during today's lunchtime webinar, we are going to be covering what's new in CAMWorks 2016, specifically what's new in the Beta 2. We're still in the beta process here. CAMWorks 2016 is not due out until late October, maybe mid-November. We're late September right now, so we're still 4 to 6 weeks out. So we're going to be looking at the Beta 2 version. This webinar is being broadcast live, which means I can't hear you, but you can hear me. If you have any questions at any time during the webinar, go ahead and type those into the questions box, and we will cover them at the end. So CAMWorks 2016 Beta, what is it all about? I've been using CAMWorks 2016 now for about a month or so, and so far I've been pretty happy with it. One thing that's very clear to me is that the 2016 release is highly focused on an improved user experience. So anytime new software comes out, there's always this balance between fixing existing bugs, making the software simpler, easier to use, more efficient, and also adding new functionality. And over the past few years, CAMWorks has been pretty heavy on adding new functionality, but that has sort of changed in this release, and I'm pretty happy with it. So within this 2016 release, we have improvements in the user interface. We have menus that are more efficient or more accessible. And we also have better control over the default behavior. But we do have some new functionality as well. Two really big things. We have B-axis turning functionality now. So for those of you out there who are CAMWorks users that have mill turn machines or turn machines, that can be indexed, or if you like to use tool holders that would index a turn tool, we can now program in an angle for our turn tool, and I'll show how that works here soon. And now we also have a multi-axis drilling operation as well for people who are drilling a lot of holes at all sorts of different angles. We can do that now without creating setups for every direction. The areas of focus for this release, there's a huge emphasis on better tool management. Also, creating 2.5 axis features. A lot of what we're going to show today revolves around the improvements in creating 2.5 axis features. There are some changes and some improvements in some of the operations and toolpath options, and also some TechDB options. We're going to shoot for about 15-20 minutes in this webinar. It's not meant to cover every single thing that's new in CAMWorks 2016, but we're going to focus on the improvements that I've found to be the most beneficial. Real quick, some information on the beta contest. So like I mentioned, I'm going to be using 2016 Beta 2. The beta version is available to anybody who is on current maintenance. And to get involved in the beta contest, all you have to do is go on to camworks.com/beta. You can download the software. You're not obligated to participate in the beta contest, but if you're going to be using the beta software anyway, you might as well report some bugs and make yourself eligible for some of these nice gift cards here. I definitely recommend, if you're already using CAMWorks for production, try to install the beta version on a machine that you're not using CAMWorks 2015 on. So with that being said, let's take a quick look at some of the improvements and additions. So the first few things we're going to look at revolve around creating 2.5 axis features. This particular part here is sort of infamous for requiring more steps than I think necessary to machine. To create these steps, we're going to have to create 3 pockets. And this bottom one's simple. We can actually just use the face to create that feature. No big deal. We're going to create a 2.5 axis feature up to that face there. Very quick. But as soon as we want to create the next step up, we start to run into issues. So this is where one of the improvements is. In the past, what we might have done is come into SOLIDWORKS, create a sketch that looks something like this. And then use this sketch to define the feature. We no longer have to do that in 2016. So in 2016, we can actually use NonPlanar Edges to help us define our feature. So we can click this edge and we can click this edge, and all of a sudden, look what happens. If you've been using CAMWorks for a while, this might have jumped out at you as kind of different behavior. So CAMWorks creates this join segment to try to create a closed space within the segments that we've selected. More on that in a minute. What's new here is I can start clicking non-planar edges like so, and now I can get the shape of the feature that I want without actually creating a sketch. So in my mind, that's pretty cool. It's going to make our lives easier as the CAMWorks users, and it's going to mean less sketching inside SOLIDWORKS. Let's jump over to another part here, and we will talk about another really cool addition to the 2.5 axis feature creation. So here's another scenario that's notoriously tough to create. If we want to mill out this pocket, there's no good edge or closed loop of edges to select. And this was always a problem. Again, before, what we might have to do is draw a sketch on this face, create sketch entities on top of those edges, and also sketch entities that bridge this gap. Creating this feature in 2016 is going to be a lot easier. It's going to look something like this. We're going to create a pocket. Instead of using edges, we're now actually going to use sidewalls. And notice when I click this sidewall, it bridges this gap for me. So we're going to select the sidewalls all around. Okay, so that's one benefit there, is using the sidewalls. And now, when it comes to create the depths, I can go down to that surface. But this has always been a problem in the past as well. The fact that the top of my feature is not accurately defined to the SOLIDWORKS model. And this was a limitation because we could only extrude or extend a feature in one direction. CAMWorks 2016, it actually allows us to create a second direction. So under this direction 2 area, I can set a blind distance, or I can go up to stock. So we don't have quite as many options as we do in the end condition number 1. I would definitely like to see an up to vertex or up to face option, which I submitted as an enhancement request in the beta contest. But for now, I'm pretty happy about this because, again, it's a situation where I would have had to create a SOLIDWORKS sketch and then define my feature from the sketch, which is extra work, extra steps, and now I don't have to do that. So let's talk a little bit more about that join segment. If you've been using the lathe module, you are probably familiar with the concept of the join. Now we have them in milling, and they're going to operate a little bit differently, but they're still beneficial. So here's another situation where in the past, this could pose a problem for us. We have a large area and a small thin area, both pockets, but really we're probably going to cut those with 2 different strategies, 2 different tools, so we need them to be defined as 2 separate features. That would be difficult in the past because of this gap here. We would have had to create a sketch. Now we don't have to. Simply by selecting the edges or the sidewall faces, as soon as I start to make it around this corner, CAMWorks automatically adds this join segment and creates this closed loop for me so that I no longer have to create that sketch. Now in turning, whenever we come across a join, we have a lot of control over how that join functions. We can tell it to take the shortest path between the 2 endpoints. We can tell it to go along X and then Z, or vice versa. We don't have that capability in milling yet. It just takes the shortest path between endpoints. I don't know if that's going to become a limitation. I haven't thought of any scenarios where it might be an issue yet, but for now, this is how it works, and I'm pretty happy with it. Let's take a look at this scenario here, where this sort of interaction between 2 features where they overlap historically has been an issue. So if I run the automatic feature recognition on this part, we'll see where the problem arises. As I highlight these slots, notice how they are the true form of the feature. And that's not really how we would want to cut this slot, because when we go to put toolpath on this part, instead of just plowing through that empty hole, our tools actually want to avoid it, and that's because of the way the feature's been defined. So that's been the default behavior up to the 2016 release. Now with the 2016 release, we can actually simplify those features. Real quick before I do that, while I'm looking at it, one other addition to 2016, when we have slots that have open air segments, they are now visibly different than the closed segments. They appear as dotted edges rather than solid edges. That can be pretty important to spot sometimes, so nice little addition there. Again, just an improvement in the user interface. Okay, so now back to this idea of simplifying features. Inside the CAMWorks options, under Mill Features, we have this Simplified Features checkbox now. When I activate that, I'm going to create a new configuration here and rerun feature recognition. And we'll see the difference now that that Simplify Features option has been enabled. So now we look at the slot and it behaves how I would want it to behave. It actually sees those features as intersecting and ignores that intersection. This is going to cut more efficiently. So if we put toolpath on this now, we'll see that it comes right into the corner as expected. All right, so that about does it for the improvements in creating 2.5 axis features. Let's take a look at some of the changes in the operations and the toolpaths. So inside this rough mill, we're just doing a standard pocket out toolpath. If I were to change this to volume mill, one of the improvements in 2016 is the addition of this pre-drilled holes. So if you're a volume mill user, you historically have been able to use ramping and spiraling into pockets, but volume mill kind of lends itself to these deep holes that we a lot of times like to pre-drill a hole and just enter through that. Now that's an option. Here's one of my favorite additions. If I'm going to manually add an operation, so instead of taking a feature and running it through the database, instead, if I wanted to manually add a rough mill, for example, this menu that comes up here has been improved significantly. So in the 2015 release and prior, this was actually two menus in one. There was up in the top right corner, there was an arrow to go to the next window. And most of the tools that you would want to use in this menu were actually in that next window. And I know myself and a lot of the people I train on CAMWorks didn't even notice that arrow existed, so we were missing out on a lot of the tools. Those menus have been combined now, so there's no next step. Everything's in this window, and then they've also added on top of that. So one of the menus, or one of the options that was in that window was this parameter defaults, and it allows you to copy from an existing operation rather than actually just using the TechDB defaults, which is useful. I use that all the time. That's always existed, but it's been kind of hidden. What's new is this tool area here. So we can actually tell it to use a different tool than what is normally in the TechDB. So if we wanted to use the TechDB, we could say use TechDB defaults and say choose from operation parameters. Or we can force it to choose a different tool by going into the tool crib and choosing a different tool in our tool crib right here. I can see that being pretty handy. While I'm looking at this menu, let's talk about some of the tool management changes. Adding tools to the tool crib looks totally different in 2016 than it has in past releases. So if I click Add New, I'm going to get this pop-up window, and this is the tool selection filter. So this window in the upper half of this box here is familiar. It's the tool selection filter, which allowed us to sort of narrow down the scope of what we were looking at in terms of tools. So we would always go choose a tool shape, say a corner round tool, and then we could add diameter filters or something like that. But we always had to add the filters, hit OK, and then it would bring us into a menu with all the tool choices. So if we had chosen options that and then changed our mind, say we added a tool filter for size and we actually wanted to change that, we'd actually have to exit the entire menu and come back in. We no longer have to do that because it's all self-contained in this one window. Another thing here is that if I was able to choose a turn tool, if I was in the turn module, I would be able to use selection filters on turn tools now as well. I'll show that in a bit. We've never been able to do that in the past. So let's say I'm going to take this contour mill and instead of actually doing a contour or a finish pass, I want to do a chamfer. So if I come to my tool crib and hit add, here's this same window we were just talking about. I'm going to choose a countersink tool. I can add a diameter filter. Don't show me anything above a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to choose, say, 90 by 3/8. Activate chamfer machining. Something that's nice here is there's some new pop-up warnings when we come to input the values for our chamfers. So if I was to input a value of, say, 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch and select preview, it'll actually warn me now and say the chamfer length is invalid. It will tell me if I have selected a chamfer that is too large for the tool or too large for the feature itself. All right, one last thing with the changes in the operations in the tool paths. Let's pick a hole here. And we will manually add a bore operation to that. We have a couple new options in some of the point-to-point tools, boring for one, and that's the option to dwell and add a shift amount. So if we choose something like back boring, we can now add a dwell and add a shift amount. These are tools that are necessary for some operations, and these options were never available inside CAMWorks, so we would have to go into the post processors on a per customer basis, add this functionality into the posting tab. We no longer have to do that. So straight out of the box, people are going to be able to dwell and add shift amounts to things like their bore cycles. I'm going to hop over to a mill turn tool, a mill turn part. And if you have been watching closely, you might have noticed that I actually have an extra tab along the top here. So CAMWorks has always had 2 tabs in the feature manager tree. We've had the CAMWorks feature tree, we've had the CAMWorks operation tree, and now we actually have a 3rd tree called the CAMWorks tool tree. I was a little apprehensive when I first saw that. I thought 2 tabs was enough, but as I've been using this release, I've actually grown to like it because the tool tab gives us easy access to our tool cribs, which is pretty neat. So we're looking at a mill turn tool crib. This is a single turret machine that I have on, but if we had twin turret, we'd actually see even more tools here. Within the icons, I can see really quickly what are mill tools and which ones are turn tools. And also, if they're black, that means I'm using them. So I can see very easily which tools are being used, which are not. And if they're being used, I can see exactly which features they're being used on. All of this information was really tough to keep track of in the past. Also within this window, I can add tools, I can edit tools, and I can replace tools. So if I were to edit a tool from here, pretty standard window that we're used to seeing. If I go into the feeds and speeds of this mill tool, notice I can now add surface feet per minute data and spindle speed data to the tool. We could never do that in the past, so new thing in 2016. Not only can I save XYZ feed rates, lead-in feed rates to a tool, but now I can also save surface feet per minute and spindle speed data as well. Saving feeds and speeds data to the tool itself is my favorite way to handle feeds and speeds. And the addition of this data here is very welcome by me. I think it's going to make my life even easier. let's take a look at some of the improvements that we have in the turning module. Real quick, if I were to add a tool here, we touched on this in the past, but I want to display it. If I go to the turn tool, I now have selection filters for my turn tools, so I can filter the type of insert. We never had this in the past, and it made selecting turn tools a little bit arduous, so this much welcome. I want to show you how B-axis turning works. It's very simple. If I find, say, this turn rough operation, and I enter this window, it's the tool tab and then the holder sub-tab. We now at the very bottom have this B-axis relative angle, and notice as I change this angle, the tool tilts either clockwise or counterclockwise depending on which direction I go. And I hit preview, and in this case I'm actually worse off, but in other cases you might actually be able to access more of a part, deeper into a part, or you might be able to angle a tool so that it holds better tolerances, it's better well positioned to attack a certain surface. So we could never program that angle in the past. Now we can. We have some limited B-axis turning functionality. We can't do a simultaneous sweeping of the tool like you see on some of the machines, like the Integrex machines are capable of that. We can do indexing only at this point, but this is a good first step. All right, let's take a quick look at the TechDB. While we're on the topic of turning, for those of you who are big on creating custom strategies, which should be everybody that's using CAMWorks, one of the downsides of doing that inside turning is we never had the ability to use the actual material of the stock as a parameter for our features. Now in 2016 we do. So notice on, say, my OD features, I can set a particular strategy to be used only on aluminums or stainless steel, etc. Just like we could in milling, now we can do that in turning. And then speaking of custom strategies, something that's been, say, maybe difficult in the past was coming in ahead of time and creating custom strategies. For example, if I look at rectangular pockets, notice I have a rough finish and I also have a rough finish plastic. The idea here is that maybe I like my rough finish operations, but I want a totally different subset of rough and finish only to use on plastics. I can create a custom strategy for that, but it's been hard to do that ahead of time here directly. Now I can actually copy not only a strategy, but every single entry in the database that uses that strategy. So what I mean by that is this rough finish strategy is used 28 times in my database. I can simply copy that, and it copies not just the name, but it copies all 28 instances and adds those to my features and operations area. I can rename it here, and then I could go into that other area and edit all of those as I wish. I can also delete strategies here as well. And when I delete them, it not only deletes the name, but it also deletes, again, all 28 instances of that strategy in my TechDB. Just the ability to copy and delete all features at once is actually going to make the TechDB management much simpler, much more efficient, and much more approachable. So I think for those of you who are a little bit hesitant to come into the TechDB and start messing around, these options here are actually going to maybe make it more approachable for you. Another change we have is in the setup sheets. We have a new type for tooling, and it will generate images of the tooling. So we'll let this do its thing. So for those of you who want to generate setup sheets and give them to your operators for the tooling, you can see something like this. I think this is pretty useful. and pretty simple to create. It's going to show you all your holder data, your tool data, your stick out, everything like that. And it's going to have some nice images to go along with them. Going back to one of these original parts here, you didn't see me create these setups, so I'll recreate a setup. There's one change I'd like to show. Historically, when I created a new mill part setup, I would click on a face, and the original origin, the origin that we start the part with, not really the one that we intend to finish with, would sort of just appear haphazardly. It could appear over on this point, it could appear over here. We had no control over it, and is a little unsafe because CAMWorks would actually allow us to go through the entire process of programming the part, never change that origin, and if the origin's down here and we think it's up here, that's going to cause a situation where we crash the machine. Now, by default, it always places the origin at the top center of the part. This is a much safer default. You're still going to want to go in and change it afterwards, but in those rare instances where you forget, you're not going to post code that's actually dangerous to your machine setup. And then lastly here, going back to better user interface and better ability to manage the TechDB. I ran this part through automatic feature recognition. It created obviously some setups, a turn setup, 2 mill part setups, created features within each one of those, and it assigned the default strategy to each one of those features. So in the case of, say, the rectangular pocket, that default strategy is rough finish. Now we have a whole new window specifically to speed up the process of changing those. So here's the default feature strategy. These are all of the features that I have available to me. I can quickly come in to, say, rectangular pockets and change that. And then save that to the TechDB. And now rectangular pockets, the new default strategy is set to coarse. And I can do this at any time and just very quickly manage what my default mill and turn strategies are. So I wouldn't expect you to come into this window a lot, but when you do need to change your strategies, maybe initially you change them all at once. And then as you create new strategies, maybe you want to change the default. This is going to be a good way for you to do that. So that's my quick overview of what's new in CAMWorks 2016. This is the beta 2 version. By the time the release comes out, there might be some more functionality. Again, we still have about 4 to 6 weeks. This release is really focused on an improved user experience. It's all about making your life as the programmer easier and also making the use of CAMWorks more efficient and quicker. I think they did a good job of hitting that while also adding some key functionality, especially that B-axis turning. So I want to thank you guys for joining me on this lunchtime webinar. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, treid@GoEngineer. If you want to check out any of our other CAMWorks videos, we have them all up on our YouTube page. Thank you guys for joining, and I'll see you next time.